I have people that don't talk at all. Sometimes I have people who talk and you can't hear them and they want me to talk. I've been doing this for a very long time, and so it varies.
Okay, guys, we're counting down. 5, 4.
After the music, right, Aura?
5.
Aura?
Yes, yes.
After the music stops.
Yes.
Okay.
5, 4, 3. 2.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. We are a monthly talk show based here at the wonderful New TV studios in Newton, Massachusetts. We are named Conservative Corner for the obvious reason that we generally talk about issues and ideas that won't necessarily be covered by the mainstream media, or rather any media in this our most liberal state in the United States, which is Massachusetts, and certainly Newton, Massachusetts. Nevertheless, we try to air the topics of the day, of the week, of the month, locally, nationally, statewide, and that's generally been our forte, shall we say, for the past several years. However, there are times when we delve into very important subjects, usually to deal with commemorations, anniversaries, and as you know, this year, 2025, is a very important year of commemorations. We just finished the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and that was a wonderful event. That really is the beginning of the celebrations, which will culminate next year for the July 4th celebration in Washington and Philadelphia and around the country. We are also commemorating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe this spring, and also the end of the Holocaust in Europe, which was 80 years ago this spring. And also, specifically why we're here tonight, we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And the topic of Vietnam, for any of us who are, shall we say, entering the retirement age, we grew up with Vietnam. We were either teenagers, children, or young adults. We usually knew somebody, if you're of the age bracket of being in the 60s, in your 60s now, that served in Vietnam, a neighbor, a relative, a friend. And the Vietnam War was with us for a very long time, because it lasted for a very long time. And again, this is the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And rather than see it go, shall we say, unrecognized, or rather not commemorated as it should be, pertaining to our veterans and those who fought and died there, we decided to have a program dedicated to the servicemen and nurses, women who served there, and those who never made it home. And I'm very glad tonight, or today rather, to have with us my dear friend, Kevin McNamara, who's a small businessman based here in Newton, and who was in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War. He served honorably, gallantly, and came home to rather mixed reviews from the public. But he is here to talk about it, to talk about his experiences, and really to remember. Kevin, I'm very glad that you're here tonight, and thank you for doing so. And I love your hat. It's wonderful. And Kevin, so you were in Vietnam in what time? What years?
1969 to 1970.
Okay,
I was in 3 Corps, which was in just south of Saigon. We were in the Fishhook area, which was a pretty hot LZ that I was in 3 different places over in the 3 Corps area of Vietnam. And anybody that's been to Vietnam, they know it's set up 4 corps. The Delta region is in flat rice paddies. You get up the north.
In South Vietnam.
South Vietnam. This is all South Vietnam.
Yes.
You had the DMZ, and that was more hilly. And the Marines, a lot of them in Hue, you probably heard the Battle of Hue. Those areas were up in the more mountainous region, but the city of Hue was just a big, bustling city.
And you were in the Army in Vietnam.
I was in the Army.
How old were you when you went to Vietnam?
I was 19, I just turned 20.
You just turned 20.
Yeah.
And what did you do just prior? Did you ever expect to be in Vietnam?
No.
When you graduated from the Newton schools?
Graduated from Newton North in 1967. And I was kicking around. A lot of my friends were kicking around. Those days were kind of turmoil because you had to figure if you're not going to go in the service, which the war was raging. And I remember seeing the Life magazine, the Look magazine at the time, which were the prominent magazines. It used to show the faces of the boys that were killed during the week. And there was a lot of them, and we lost a fair amount in Newton here. But it didn't resonate too much with me because I was kind of just a kid that didn't have a lot of direction because I had dropped out of college, a Newton Junior College. And my father said, Kevin, you got 3 choices. And he was dead serious. You either go in the service, and my father was from the Second World War era. Go in the service, get a job, or get out. And that's what he said to me. And so I took the get out sign, and I ended up in California for about 4 months, just kicking around the streets out there in Haight-Ashbury and those silly places. And I recognized I was wrong to do what I did because I wanted to spite my father. And my father was from that generation of a great foundation of people come home from the service, bring up their families, buy their small homes, and pray to God. And I wasn't a very highly religious person, but I realized early on when my father said about wherever you go, don't forget to pray. And I'm not here to say that's kind of directed me through my life. But my father was a man that made me realize that I've got to wake up. And then when I was in California, we used to have telephone booths. And I used to call my mother person to person so that she would know that I was alive. And I didn't want to talk to my father. You know, he was the guy that said, go out if you don't want to do anything that's productive. So I wanted to show him I was a tough guy. But Newton North, it was a great school, and I enjoyed all my friends, but some were going in the service and some were just kicking around. I called my mother and she said, Kevin, your draft notice came. And I was 2,500 miles away. I said, what am I going to do now? And I worked for a week on a toy store, and I made up enough money to come home. And probably around May, I knew this was serious. I went down to the draft board, and she said to me, your days are numbered. We went to the, she said, there's a bus coming, and they're going to take you all you guys out. There's 3 buses that took us to the Boston Army base. And we're all kind of a motley crew. And
this was in 1969?
68.
68, okay.
And we had long hair and so forth. And this fellow said, anybody want to try to get out of the service, put your hands up now. And I told him I had a hearing problem. And I wasn't telling the truth. And he knew it. These people were fine, smart. But I didn't want to go in the service. I could care less about Okinawa or Iwo Jima and all these other places. I was just a kid that I played a little guitar, and my parents wanted the best for me to do the right thing, but I wasn't going down that road. And a lot of my friends were the same way. But we were smart. We were smart. We just either started college, and remember, the 60s were an interesting time. Anybody that lived them and realized them, they were a very, very influential time. Well, I ended up on that bus, and every third man had to step out. They were drafted into the Marines. They drafted them into the Marines for 2 years. And anybody of that era knows what I'm talking about. I went down to Fort Dix, and I knew I was in trouble.
In New Jersey?
Yep, in New Jersey, and we spent 8 weeks there. And I smoked, most of the people smoked cigarettes in those days. But we had to run everywhere we went, and they wanted to build us up because we all knew we were going overseas. We just knew it. And we knew that from people that were at our base down there, that these guys were hardened warriors. They were like tech officers or what we were learning to do from infantry or whatever they were gonna put us into. They actually put me into a Morse code, and I was able to learn Morse code and do typing and listen to Morse code. And finally, they put us into this KWM box which was secretive. Anybody that was in 05C20, that was my MOS. That was my job.
What does MOS mean?
It was the job that they labeled you,
Okay.
05C20. And that job would give you an opportunity to stay out of the battles. However, we were out in the field. Once I got my orders for Vietnam, I was in Kansas. And I didn't want to stay in Kansas because we were doing Morse code with deciphering coded messages. That's what we were doing. We'd make a C, a D, a D, a T, and it was 5-letter increments. It was fascinating, but at the time I could care less. I was just thinking, this is what my job is, and I did it. And I'd listen to the sounds of Morse code. I was valuable. They needed us to decipher these coded messages, because when I got my orders for Vietnam, I ended up just outside of Saigon. And I was told that I'm going to go to a place called Rocket Alley. And I didn't know anything about that. I had a green suit on and I was cleaned up and all that. And I remember guys saying, oh, you're going up to Lac K, you're going to Lac K. And I remember saying that Lac K was a very sensitive part of Vietnam. We were rocketed a lot, mortared a lot. But our unit, we had a lot of sandbags on top of us. And we got to the point where some of the guys, when I talked to the kids like at Newton North High School about the war, I realized that these kids were just like me, looking at me, and I was just like them, looking at me. Mm-hmm. And as important as we think we are, we can be gone within a second. Mm-hmm. And I remember my father drove me to the airport. He said, Kevin, just please don't forget to pray. Just don't stop praying. And my father was a guy that he just kicked along. He had a bad arm. He died a young man, but he was happy to see me come home. He took me to the local bar. He said, please keep your uniform on. And he said, I want to show you my buddies down that bar. And I walked in there. My experience in Vietnam, Tom, I was in an infantry unit, a Vietnamese infantry unit, that I was attached to do communications. Some of the guys over there, there's one thing about Vietnam that a lot of the stories you hear about, a lot of guys did do drugs. A lot of guys did get themselves in trouble. And a lot of guys, under certain circumstances, because we were a hot area, we were shot at a lot, we were rocketed a lot, we had to keep our head down and keep our head clear. Because the unit I was in, the 25th Infantry, the Vietnamese infantry, we ended up seeing a lot of activity that maybe they didn't see in Saigon or areas like that. We didn't see a lot of, I was in a Vietnamese unit with Vietnamese counterparts. We had North Koreans,
The South Vietnamese
Army. They were fantastic people.
Yes.
We all knew if we were to leave, because at the time Nixon was Vietnamization, it was called, and they were cutting back on the level of men. There's about 450,000 Americans there when I was there, mm-hmm. and it had escalated, and they realized this is going nowhere. So in around 1970, they started pulling American units out, and I was attached. I was a Big Red 1, the First Army, but I was attached to the Vietnamese infantry unit, so I stayed there. And the Americans were leaving, and I stayed in my unit with communications. At the time, we had issues where I had friends that were pilots. And again, all these fellows that would know, back in those days, they were bird dogs. They were little small propeller planes that were from the Korean War. Just old planes. And friends of mine would be spotter planes. And they were good friends of mine, so they said, Kevin, you want to go up with me? And I'd fly up with them. And we go to up into areas where the Viet Cong were. And they would set up these arms caches up near the border. And they would set up these...
The border of North Vietnam.
No, the border of Cambodia.
Cambodia.
And Cambodia was a neutral country. So there wasn't a war going on there. However, there was a lot of skirmishes that happened to spill over here and there. Thailand was a neutral country. Laos, I believe, was too. But Vietnam was what it was, and Ho Chi Minh felt like he wanted to have this thing called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we used to...
Ho Chi Minh being the communist leader of
He was a leader.
North Vietnam.
And he was in Boston at one point in his life.
I heard that, you
Yeah,
know, and interestingly enough, I actually heard this short story that he worked as a waiter or a busboy at the Parker
he was
House.
working with desserts. He was passing out
And
desserts.
prior to World War I or thereabouts. That's
He
interesting.
did like the Americans. He didn't. I read a book about him. There's a lot of great books about that era, but again, I was just 20 years old. I could care less about this stuff, but now I'm more involved because I'm involved with you, Tom, and a group at the Post 440. But I feel like this government, the American government, I know it's been beaten up constantly. There's so much going on. It's frustrating to me because I love this country and what they've done for me. I remember when we did get into skirmishes, I prayed the Our Father. And again, I'm not a holy roller, I'm not.
Yes.
But here I am talking to you now, and maybe there's a reason for it. I remember those days when I came home, when I went through Fort Ord, California, to a relaying plane to Logan. There was all these kids that were demonstrating, and I could care less about it.
What happened when you came home?
There was a lot of dissent on the colleges and stuff.
What did you personally experience?
When I came home, I went through the California area, and there were cops with these blue helmets, and they had their weapons and stuff, and I didn't care about it. I just wanted to get home to Logan. I was on a connecting flight. And there were these kids that were...
And you're in full uniform.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had a duffel bag. I got my big duffel bag. And I was walking through the airport, and I didn't even care what they were calling me, or calling us. I didn't care.
What did they call you?
I honest to God, Tom, I don't know.
Okay.
I just know that...
But it was negative.
It wasn't...
It wasn't pleasant.
It is what it is.
Yes.
My feeling is... I'm going to tell you, I've often said this to people. Maybe those people marching, and I don't have a lot of compassion for some of the stuff going on today with the Jewish situation in the colleges and these kids that are demonstrating. I don't like that, but just maybe when I saw those pictures of those kids killed, because I saw a man shot beside me, and it's not pleasant. I feel like when I saw those kids doing that, they don't understand what this, maybe I was just unlucky. Maybe I was lucky enough to get out of there, but in deference to the guys that were out in the field all the time, I wasn't like that. I wasn't hunting for Charlie, but the Viet Cong. I was fairly secure in my little area.
Well, you were more or less in intelligence, Army intelligence.
I was working with intelligence. I was organizing some of that stuff. Finally, they didn't need us. We became baggage that wasn't used, and they became more high tech.
And then you were shipped home.
I turned and I did a Mars radio system that I was able to patch for.
You know, Kevin, the interesting thing is that when you were drafted, you had really three choices, I think. You could either feign some disability, as people did at the time. You could have gone to Canada, as many did at the time, or you could have gone to Vietnam, gone into the military to Vietnam, as you did. Now, the first category of people, obviously, who feign some type of ailment, disability, they're not really to be commended for anything. The second category, likewise. But the third category, the ones who were drafted and who did go, they are to be commended, and you are too, because you answered your nation's call of duty. However, the reasons may have been unclear at the time, why we were in Vietnam, but you had options that you really could have exercised, but didn't, and you still went.
Tom, I didn't think about it. In fact, I wouldn't have done that Canada thing, and I wouldn't have hurt myself. it's just not in me. And I think the way I think now. I guess, they put us in a conservative, a liberal,
Yeah.
independent. I think that's silly. I'm just a common sense person. And there's one thing the service did for me. It woke me up. It made me realize what a man has to be. And a man has to be, in my estimation, I've seen divorces all around me, all my family and all that. I want my children, my grandchildren, to understand that this country is not free. People have to decide what direction to go in. If you want to be a protester or get involved in issues that can be an issue, and whether it be the schools or these kids that are being thrown out of these, like Columbia or Harvard, or these people are smart people. And I believe that they have a agenda. But my agenda when I came home was to get my life in order, get back to college and use my VA loans and go to college. And I bought a house on the GI Bill. I'm part of the VA. I have some medical issues. Who doesn't at a certain age? I want to stay involved because what this country has done for me.
Well, I'd like to mention also, you are very much involved, and you're involved in the community and with veterans at large. And one thing in particular that you do every Christmas morning, you and I and a bunch of us from the American Legion go down to the New England Center for Homeless Veterans in Boston on Christmas morning, and you're a musician, and you go there and you play the guitar, and there's an ensemble that sings Christmas carols, as your granddaughter came with us last time, and we bring gift cards to them, to all these homeless veterans who are homeless for whatever reason. Most of them are younger. They're not, some of them are Vietnam era, but most of them are younger. And you've done a lot with your contemporaries and with veterans in general. And so you've done it without seeking any type of recognition or fanfare, but I'm giving it to you now, and it's to be commended that you do that to this day. What's interesting to me, Kevin, is that I remember Vietnam vividly growing up and in the 60s, and I remember my father showing me the Green Pages in 1968 at the time of the Tet Offensive by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. And the Green Pages were the the soldiers who were killed in Vietnam at the time, locally in the Boston Globe. And there were so many of them. And it was very sad to see that, and that stuck with me. And I also remember that there were 2 kids in my grade school who had to come out of school because their brothers were killed in Vietnam. And you remember things like that, it just stays with you. So as I entered my adulthood, so to speak, or latter adulthood, I wrote several to a dozen articles about Vietnam and the experience that all of you had in Vietnam, in a very flattering way to give you the recognition and tributes that you didn't necessarily receive when you were there and when you came home shortly after. And I remember that we did 2 things. I was involved in 2 important things for the local high schools. One was we set up a series of plaques to memorialize those soldiers from Newton North who were killed in Vietnam. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember that the ceremony was very touching. And it was actually the niece of, the daughter, the niece of a fellow named James Rice, who was killed in Vietnam 2 days before he was to be discharged, to be sent home for Christmas. And she set that up, and it was a wonderful ceremony. And there was one lady that I met there in particular, and I knew I knew of the father because I wrote about him. His name was Ricky Likely. And Ricky Likely, again, was one of these young men from Newton who was scheduled to be sent home. And he was killed a few weeks before he was sent home. And he had married, he was able to get married at a very young age, 19 or 20, when he was home stateside for a vacation or leave of duty, I should say. And so his wife gave birth while he was stationed overseas. So he never got to see his daughter.
No.
And his mother was still alive, Nikki likely. And the daughter, whose name, forgive me, escapes me, but nevertheless, she would come to the ceremonies thereafter. But I remember her in particular. She was very emotional and sobbing. And so I remember taking her aside and saying to her at the plaque ceremony at Newton North, where her father's name was there, and she had never met him. And I said, look, you are actually, or your father was actually one of the lucky ones, because none of these men, to the best of my knowledge, whose names are on that plaque, had children. And he did, and that's you. And so you will carry on your father's legacy. And then we did the same thing at Newton South a year later, because that worked out so well. But also, I want people to realize that the largest group of veterans now are veterans of the Vietnam War. And it's difficult to think of all of you in retirement age, but you are. And you're very much with us. You're very much, thankfully, and you will be for a very long time. And one thing that I make a point to do, whenever I see someone with a Vietnam veteran hat on, I always make it a point, and I encourage my family to do so, to go up and thank them for this service, because they deserve to be thanked. And as you recall, a decade ago, we had a 40th anniversary dinner for Vietnam veterans, hosted by the Newton American Legion. And we had over 140 veterans who came there, and I was honored to be one of the speakers. And I was very touched by that honor. And this fall, we're going to be doing a similar thing. And what I'd like to do at this time is to remember, and these are men that I wrote about and will continue to honor, and these are the men from Newton who were killed in Vietnam. And I'll read their names. Richard Cardinelli, Rupert Carvin III, Warren Dixon, Paul Dunn Jr., Bob Ferris, John Flood Jr., Richard Forte, John Greenleaf, Daniel Kent, Peter Kleinberg, Ricky Likely, Fred McLaughlin, Walter O'Neill, John Murray, Jim McMahon, Rick Pagnano, James Rice, Wally Richard, Bob Steinseck, Arthur Stroyman, Frank Turbert, Blair Ryer, Ralph Wright. And again, these were men that were lost to us and who sacrificed their lives in Vietnam and never came home. And it's important to honor them, as I said in my articles, and as we're doing right now. So as we commemorate and remember the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, we have to be thankful that while so many were killed in Vietnam, over 50,000, so many tens of thousands of soldiers like you came home safe and sound. And you came home and you were able to get married, have children, and now you're a grandfather as well. And it's important for all of America to pay tribute, and really a solemn tribute to all of those who didn't come home. And that's why we're here tonight. And that's why we felt it was important to remember the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, April 30th, 1975, and here we are in 2025. And you're here with us, and we're glad that you're here with us. And it's a blessing that you are, and we thank you. Thank you so much for your service, and God bless you, and I mean that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.